Hello and welcome. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Picture yourself standing at the threshold of a dream. Before you, a seemingly endless corridor stretches out, its walls shimmering with gold leaf, the ceilings alive with painted gods and goddesses frolicking in celestial skies. Light refracts from 1,000 teardrop crystals, hanging from chandeliers, scattering miniature rainbows across polished marble floors. The air is thick with the whisper of silk and the soft clack of heeled shoes. This is the Palace of Versailles, the beating heart of 17th century Europe, the undisputed epicenter of power, art, and elegance. It is a vision of absolute perfection. Now, take a breath. A deep one. Inhale past the heavy, cloying scent of ambergris and tuberose perfume. Push through the aroma of beeswax and wood smoke. And there you will find it. An underlying current, an invisible miasma so potent, so deeply offensive, it feels like a physical assault on the senses. It is the smell of unwashed bodies, of stale sweat, of rancid animal fat, of human waste, and of pervasive, creeping decay. This, my friends, was the great stinking paradox of the Ancien regime. Welcome to the true Versailles, a place where unparalleled opulence was locked in a daily losing battle with unimaginable filth. Today we are not here to admire the architecture. We are here to pull back the luxurious brocade curtains and expose the deeply unsettling and frankly stomach-turning private lives of the women who inhabited this golden cage. These are the 5 great sanitation nightmares that noble women endured at the zenith of French royal power. Prepare yourselves, for the reality is far from the fairy tale. Our modern lives begin and end with water. A hot shower to wake us, a warm bath to soothe us. We see water as a symbol of purity, of cleansing, of health. But for a high-ranking lady at the court of the Sun King, water was not a friend. It was a foe, a Trojan horse for every malady imaginable. You must understand the leading scientific minds of the era. The physicians in their somber robes preached a dangerous dogma. They believed the human body was a fortress, and its pores were the gates. Warm water, they argued, was a treacherous agent that would throw these gates wide open, allowing a host of invisible evils, what they called miasmas or malevolent vapors, to rush in and wreak havoc upon the vital organs. To bathe was to invite pestilence, to willingly lower your defenses against the plague, the pox, and 100 other phantom threats that danced in the air. This medical superstition was powerfully reinforced by the church. From the pulpit, priests thundered against the act of bathing, condemning it as an exercise in vanity, a gateway to licentious thoughts and moral corruption. Bathhouses were seen not as places of cleanliness, but as dens of iniquity. So, what was a God-fearing, health-conscious noblewoman to do? She turned her back on water. The daily ritual of a full-body wash was simply not part of her reality. Private bathrooms with running water were the stuff of fantasy. Instead, the height of personal cleansing involved a practice one might call a dry rub. A lady would take a square of clean linen, dampen it ever so slightly, perhaps with a bit of alcohol-based perfume, sharp vinegar, or, in many cases, her own saliva, and proceed to wipe her face, her hands, and the delicate skin of her décolletage. The goal was not to wash, but to abrade the surface dirt without the perceived danger of opening the pores. The rest of the body, swaddled in layers of linen, corsetry, and silk, was left to its own devices for weeks, sometimes months on end. On the exceedingly rare occasion that a full bath was prescribed, perhaps for a specific medical reason, it was a far cry from a luxurious spa experience. It was a communal affair, governed by the rigid hierarchy of the household. A large wooden tub would be hauled into a chamber and filled with heated water, a laborious process. The man of the house, the patriarch, would bathe first, then his sons in order of age. By the time it was the lady's turn, she would be stepping into a tepid, murky soup of soap scum, shed skin, and the collective grime of her entire family. It was less a cleansing than a lukewarm soak in human residue. And the effect of this collective hydrophobia? The magnificent halls of Versailles, for all their gilded splendor, stank. Visitors from other countries wrote home in shock, describing an overpowering odor that clung to every tapestry and curtain, a bizarre cocktail of expensive, heavy perfumes, desperately trying and failing to mask the undeniable stench of unwashed humanity. For the women, who were held up as paragons of beauty and divine perfection, the irony was a cruel one. They were living artworks, encased in jewels and powdered to an ethereal white, but beneath the exquisite facade was a reality of discomfort and odor. They were designed to be admired from a distance because up close the illusion would crumble, and the beautiful idol would be revealed as painfully, pungently human. Let us now turn to a matter of basic human necessity, something so fundamental we scarcely give it a thought. The toilet. The Palace of Versailles was a sprawling masterpiece of over 700 rooms, designed to house thousands of aristocrats, servants, and officials. It was a city unto itself. And yet, in this monument to human achievement, its architects had made a catastrophic omission. It had almost no toilets. This fact is so staggering it bears repeating. In a place of overwhelming scale and luxury, there were virtually no designated plumbed-in spaces for human waste disposal. So, where did everyone go? The answer lay in the humble chamber pot. These vessels, often beautifully crafted from porcelain and painted with delicate floral patterns, were the primary sanitation system of the court. They were tucked away everywhere, slid under the voluminous skirts of four-poster beds, hidden behind priceless tapestries, and stashed in small, unventilated closets. When nature made its urgent call, a courtier would retreat to one of these semi-private nooks, use the pot, and that was that. But what happened next is where the true horror lies. The disposal method was as simple as it was hazardous. Servants, or sometimes the courtiers themselves, would simply carry the full pot to the nearest open window and unceremoniously dispatch its contents into the world below. A casual toss into the manicured gardens, a splash against the palace walls, or a cascade into the courtyards where people milled about. Passers-by had to develop a keen ear for the warning cry of "Gardez-lo!" Watch out for the water, lest they receive a sudden foul baptism from above. Many of the men, less inclined to seek out a pot, saw no issue with simply relieving themselves wherever they stood. An ornate balcony, a secluded corner of a grand hallway, or even against the priceless brocade curtains, the entire palace became a de facto urinal. Foreign ambassadors wrote with undisguised disgust of the sights and smells they encountered, of navigating corridors that served as public latrines, of having to lift their fine cloaks to avoid stepping in human and animal excrement that littered the floors. Imagine being a lady of the court, a vision of grace in a gown that might have cost a skilled worker a decade's wages. Imagine gliding through the hall of mirrors, your posture perfect, your fan fluttering artfully, all while your primary focus is scanning the marble floor ahead, not for dropped jewels, but for puddles and piles to avoid. The sheer indignity is breathtaking. The situation became so notoriously foul that in 1715, a royal decree was issued. It was not a call for the installation of a modern sewage system. It was an order that the main corridors of the Palace of Versailles were to be thoroughly cleaned of feces once a week. This was heralded as a major step forward in public hygiene. A weekly cleaning, and what of wiping? Toilet paper was a distant future invention. The materials of choice were whatever came to hand, scraps of old cloth, perhaps even torn bits of expensive lace for the very wealthy, handfuls of moss or straw, or in moments of grim necessity, the bare hand. Subsequent washing was a cursory affair at best. In this environment, where waste was flung from windows and personal cleanup was an afterthought, it is no surprise that disease was a constant, unwelcome guest, and parasites flourished, making no distinction between a duke and a stable hand. If there was one area where the women of Versailles truly reigned supreme, it was in the realm of hair. But we are not talking about simple updos. We are talking about towering, elaborate sculptures of hair that defied gravity and, as it happens, all notions of hygiene. These coiffures were the ultimate status symbol. To achieve the necessary height and volume, a woman's natural hair was merely the foundation. It was bulked out with pads of horsehair, wool, or even simple wireframes. Upon this structure, the stylist, the coiffeur, would build the masterpiece. And what held it all together? A thick, sticky pomade, a greasy concoction rendered from beef tallow, or, for the truly luxurious, bear fat. This pomade was the glue, allowing the hair to be molded into curls, waves, and astonishing shapes. Once the structure was complete, it was decorated, and the decorations were fantastically absurd. We're not just talking ribbons and pearls. Women sported entire scenes atop their heads. Miniature gardens with tiny silk flowers, pastoral landscapes with little model sheep, and most famously, fully rigged model ships sailing on a sea of powdered curls to commemorate a naval victory. These were not hairdos, they were architectural follies. But this greasy, warm, and elaborate nest, which was rarely, if ever, disassembled for something as trivial as sleeping, became a five-star resort for a very particular type of resident, head lice. Lice infestations were not a shameful secret. They were an accepted, universal reality of court life. These towering wigs became bustling metropolises for vermin. The constant itching was a torment, but a lady could not be seen to frantically scratch her head in public. To do so would be a catastrophic breach of etiquette. The solution? A new courtly accessory was born, the lice claw or gratte. These were long, slender rods, often made of silver or exquisitely carved ivory with a tiny, delicate claw or hand at the end. A lady could be seen at a banquet, mid-conversation, gracefully lifting this elegant tool to slide it deep within her coiffure to find a moment's relief from the crawling pests within. It was a tool of immense practicality disguised as an object of art. The fashion was not just unsanitary, it was perilous. The sheer weight of these creations caused chronic neck pain and headaches, and the combination of dry powder and fatty pomade made them incredibly flammable. A woman who leaned too close to a candelabra, a ubiquitous feature of the palace, risked having her entire headpiece go up in flames. Yet no one dared opt out. In the brutally competitive social ecosystem of Versailles, appearance was everything. Your hairstyle communicated your wealth, your taste, and your proximity to the center of power. To have a less than fashionable hairdo was to risk social oblivion. And so, the women of the court soldiered on, their heads held high, crowned with ships and gardens, even as they reeked of rancid fat and hosted entire colonies of unwanted guests. Their hair was their crown, a heavy, itchy, and crawling burden of glory. The royal banquets at Versailles were the stuff of legend. They were grand theatrical productions of consumption, with tables groaning under the weight of dozens of courses. Roasted swans, mountains of oysters, intricate pies shaped like castles, and pyramids of jewel-like sugared fruits. It was a display of power, a declaration that the bounty of France belonged to the king. But behind the spectacle of the dining hall, a gruesome secret festered in the kitchens. The palace's abysmal sanitation problems did not stop at the kitchen door. The primitive plumbing system was prone to failure, and one of the most horrifying consequences was the periodic backup of the raw sewage system directly into the food preparation areas. There are verified accounts of foul, contaminated wastewater bubbling up through the drains and flooding the very kitchens where meals for the royal family, including Queen Marie Antoinette, were being prepared. Even without such dramatic failures, the kitchens were a minefield of foodborne pathogens. Refrigeration did not exist. Huge cuts of meat would hang in the heat for days, inviting flies and rot. There was no concept of sanitizing surfaces. Pests from rats to roaches had free rein. Cooks with no understanding of germ theory would move from handling raw, potentially contaminated meat to preparing delicate pastries without so much as a proper hand washing. The result was a culinary lottery where every bite was a gamble. For the courtiers, chronic gastrointestinal distress was simply a part of life. Diarrhea, vomiting, and stomach cramps were so common, they were barely remarked upon. But more sinister things lurked in the undercooked meats and cross-contaminated dishes. Intestinal parasites were rampant, and no one, absolutely no one, was immune. The most powerful man in Europe, the Sun King himself, Louis XIV, was famously and frequently afflicted. In a particularly well-documented incident, the king's physicians recorded that he had passed a tapeworm several inches long, a grim, writhing testament to the fact that even absolute monarchy offered no protection from the consequences of a filthy kitchen. For the women of the court, dining was yet another performance. They had to nibble delicately, engage in witty banter, and maintain a mask of serene amusement, all while potentially battling waves of nausea or the sharp pains of an impending digestive crisis. To show discomfort was to show weakness, and so they suffered in silence, smiling through meals that could be seeding their bodies with infection and parasites, paying a hidden internal price for the privilege of a seat at the royal table. We arrive now at our final, and perhaps most profoundly disturbing, aspect of a noblewoman's life, the act of childbirth. For any woman in any era, it is a moment of intense vulnerability, pain, and intimacy. But for a queen of France or a high-ranking duchess, it was something else entirely. It was a state-mandated spectator sport. When a royal woman went into labor, her bedchamber was not a private sanctuary. It was transformed into a public theater. The room would be thrown open and packed to the rafters with dozens of people. Courtiers, ministers, priests, physicians, and members of the extended royal family would all crowd in to watch the proceedings. Not to help, not to offer comfort, but simply to bear witness. The reason for this bizarre and cruel ritual was dynastic paranoia. The court lived in mortal fear of a succession scandal. What if the queen delivered a stillborn child, or worse, a daughter, and a healthy baby boy was secretly smuggled into the room and swapped? To prevent any such claims of illegitimacy, the entire birth, from the first contraction to the final push, had to occur in full public view. The legitimacy of the heir had to be unimpeachable. Imagine the sheer terror. A woman in the throes of agonizing labor, exposed and struggling, surrounded by a jostling, whispering, staring audience. When Marie Antoinette gave birth to her first child, the room was so dangerously overcrowded, and the air so hot and suffocating from the crush of bodies that she fainted from exhaustion and asphyxiation moments after the delivery. Her life was saved only by physicians frantically breaking a window to let in fresh air. Beyond the psychological trauma, the physical dangers were immense. This was an age before germ theory had taken hold in obstetrics. The physicians and midwives who attended these births would proceed with unwashed hands and unsterilized instruments, unknowingly introducing deadly bacteria into the mother's body. Postpartum infections known as childbed fever were rampant and almost always fatal. The mortality rate for both mothers and infants was terrifyingly high. Nearly a third of all children died before their 5th birthday. For the royal women, a pregnancy was a period of immense pressure, and a birth was a public performance fraught with peril. It was a national event that stripped them of their dignity, privacy, and often their lives. They were celebrated as vessels of the royal bloodline, but in their most vulnerable moments, they were treated as little more than public property, their suffering a mere prelude to the political theater of succession. So there you have it. The silks and the satins, the jewels and the gilded halls were but a thin veneer, a fragile mask hiding a world of profound discomfort and danger. The women of Versailles, celebrated as icons of elegance, were champions of endurance. They navigated a world that was physically revolting and psychologically brutal, all while upholding an impossible standard of grace. The story of Versailles is not just one of gold and glass. It is a story of grit, grime, and guts. It reminds us that behind the grand sweep of history there are intimate human realities. The itch, the stench, the pain, and the fear. The past, as it turns out, is not always a pretty picture. Sometimes it is utterly and fascinatingly filthy.